or specifically Society Hill, the residential section that's preserved here in Old City, Philadelphia. We're looking at St. Peter's Episcopal Church right now, built in 1758. This would have been a significant church for the time. A peek across the corner, we have the Thaddeus Kosciuszko House, built in 1774. Very significant, and I'd advise you to see my separate video on that house. This happens to be a tour of the neighborhood, and specifically Delancey Street. We're looking now on one of the main streets, and as I mentioned before, in colonial days, the main streets had the bigger houses, the mansions, and the places where the rich and the richer people lived. When you see these smaller houses, these 2.5-story houses, these would be more middle class. And most of the time you would see these smaller houses on the side streets. The main streets held the bigger houses, and the side streets held the smaller houses. May have mentioned in a prior video that these smaller houses is where the poor lived. To be more accurate, this would be where the middle class lived. I would say the poor of Philadelphia would have lived like the poor anywhere, and that would have been perhaps in wooden shanties. We're looking at some beautiful architecture. All the houses from the colonial period. We're going to say 1750, and then up to maybe perhaps 1800. The last one on the main street, many stories, quite beautiful. And now we're on Delancey, looking at perhaps the merchant houses. Merchants were very popular in Philadelphia and were middle class. These were tradesmen, made their living buying and selling goods. As we make our way down the street, I'd just like to point out there are new museums. This is pretty much a residential street. Every house is privately owned. Society Hill has so many colonial properties, it would be impossible to make each a museum. I love this house. You might notice one room per floor. Small building. One room per floor. And then right across the street, some larger buildings. An interesting fact about colonial Philadelphia, the population at the time, probably about 1780, would have been about 40,000. 40,000 people living in a very small area, several blocks by perhaps a mile. Several blocks from the river, the Delaware River, perhaps a mile north to south. Today, for reference, Society Hill has less than 8,000 residents. As we go down the small streets, it leads to yet other smaller streets and courtyards. These would have all been filled in with brick houses by about 1750. Prior to that, we would have had some spaces between them where I believe we would have seen some of those wooden houses. William Penn had made a law that all the houses in Philadelphia should be made of brick. He watched London burn in 1666. You might think of that law as like the speed limit. It's the law of the land, but how many people actually followed it? Certainly there were wooden houses in colonial Philadelphia. Flemish bond brickwork. Researching this particular street, we're at the 200 block of Delancey. We've looked at the 400 block of Delancey and Front Street extensively, giving the impression the entire neighborhood is full of these structures. This particular block of Delancy Street, after doing some research, the houses average for about $1 million. We're back on the corner with a significant property, another mansion. Colonial life for the middle class. Delancy Street in Philadelphia, Society Hill. Now this little courtyard says private, but it doesn't mean we can't zoom it. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, please subscribe.